Today we're going to talk about a concept that's very important to understand both defensively and offensively as it relates to submission escapes. This is going to be important as well for offense, but just for the context of today's video, we're going to talk about it as it relates to submission escapes. Okay, and this is the idea that when you're looking to escape submissions, okay, particular joint locks, okay, we're talking about joint locks today. We want to categorize joint locks into two categories. You have linear locks. Okay, examples of linear locks are things like arm bars, knee bars, ankle locks, things of that nature, anything that's straight, and twisting locks or rotational locks. Okay, things like kimura, things like heel hooks, toe holds are examples of twisting locks. As you start getting better and better at jiu-jitsu, the idea of chaining attacks becomes more and more important. Okay, when you start off learning jiu-jitsu, you learn an arm bar, and you learn the basic application, and you just learn that one move. But as you start to get better and better, you're going against more and more skilled training partners and opponents, you start to realize that a lot of times you throw up a move, okay, I'd say probably around 80% of the time that you throw up a move, it doesn't work. And so the idea of chaining moves together, be it positionally or submission or interplaying submissions with positional attacks and vice versa, is going to be very, very important for you. Now, how does this tie into linear twisting locks and defensive and submission escapes, rather? The idea we're going to talk about today is just something that conceptually you should be thinking about when you're going in and escaping submissions, escaping joint locks in particular, and it's also going to be relevant offensively, but we're going to look at it from a defensive perspective today. This is the idea that not always, but many times, when you're escaping a linear lock, you will often feed into your opponent's secondary attack, which will many times be a rotational lock, and vice versa. Okay, so your opponent has you in a straight arm bar, you go in, hitchhiker escape, opponent turns it into omoplata. So you can see how that's just a basic example of how many times you're escaping a linear lock and it turns into a rotational lock. Now, why is that? Okay, that's not always the case. You could definitely chain linear locks with other linear locks, but many times it will turn into a rotational lock. Okay, so why is that? It's because very often when you go in to defend a linear lock, it's going to involve some sort of rotation of the joint on your part. So the example that I just talked about was the hitchhiker escape. Okay, if Silvio has me in a straight arm bar and he goes to straighten my arm out, you can see that the arm is straight. Okay, so this is clearly the strength of the lock. So it's going to involve some sort of rotation on my part that's going to allow me to start alleviating pressure on the arm and ultimately start going in for my escape. Now, if he's relatively new and not very skilled in this position, I'm going to get out just from this defense. But as you start going against more and more skilled people, they're going to start chaining moves together. Okay, they can start chaining submissions or position with submission, submission with submission, or position with position. So in this case, he's chaining two submissions together. So as I go in and I start creating a rotation that alleviates pressure from the arm bar, I start coming up to my knees and he starts feeding into omoplata. And you can see that from here, the escape, okay, of the linear lock fed into his rotational attack. So it's very important from a defensive perspective when you're going in and starting to play with late stage escapes and escaping submissions, that you understand this idea that many times, and again, not always, it's not always the case that you're going to have to escape a linear lock via some sort of rotation, but in many cases you will have to. Okay, the opposite is also true. So when you go to escape a rotational submission or some sort of twisting lock, you will often involve some sort of straightening of your limb in order to alleviate pressure. So a good example of this would be if we go lower body this time, puts me in a toe hold. Right here, the toe hold is an example of a twisting lock, okay? And from here, he applies pressure. It's going to involve a spin and a straightening of my leg to take pressure off of the toe hold. And as I go in and I start going for that spin, he can take advantage of the fact that I straighten my leg to start turning this into a knee bar, okay? And now he has me in a straight knee bar on this side. So if you guys come around, you can see that. The fact that I had to straighten my leg in order to take pressure off of the rotation of his initial attack, fed into his secondary attack, which is knee bar. You can go far into this, okay? So chaining attacks doesn't have to be just 1 and 2, okay? As you get better and better, offensively, you're gonna have to learn to chain 2, 3, and 4 attacks together, okay? Usually it's not more than 3 or 4, but at least 3 attacks as you start gaining higher and higher skill level, higher and higher skilled opponents. And as a defensive person, you have to anticipate the fact that as you go in and defend that move, he's going to have a follow-up. As I go in and I start defending that toe hold, inadvertently, it's going to feed into his knee bar. Now, as I go in and I defend that knee bar, it's a linear lock. My leg is straight. It's going to involve some sort of rotation of my leg. So as he goes in and applies pressure, my leg stays straight. Now I'm getting broken. So you can go ahead. And now from here, I'm going to have to start creating some sort of a twist to take pressure off. And you can see that right from here, now we're in a cross offshoot position. He can start feeding into heel hook if he wanted to. He could feed into heel hook on the inside. He could feed into heel hook on the outside. Okay, and that feeds into a twisting lock. Okay, so you can, go down various rabbit holes of submissions and chain them together and see how, as you defend one, inadvertently it's going to feed into the strength of the other lock. So both defensively and offensively, it's important to understand this. If I'm attacking my training partner and I go for an arm bar and he tries to hitchhike her out, I want to be able to chain it with another submission that's appropriate. And if I notice that there's some sort of rotation involved in his submission defense, I can often chain it into some sort of a twisting lock, okay, and at the lower body as well. Okay, so just a very important concept for you to understand as it relates to submission escapes, particularly late stage escapes. And this is something that we talk about in the leg lock defense instructional. That was my most recent instructional. We go over the idea that, especially in the lower body, when you go in and you start going to late stage escapes, that this is a very, very important thing to keep in mind. Again, it's not the only way to do it. Okay, there's different ways to go in and escape, but many times your defense to a move is either going to involve a straightening of the leg if it's a rotational lock, or a twisting of the leg when it's a linear lock, and it's going to feed into a different submission. So it's a very important concept to understand. Just something to keep in mind. It's not a hard rule, but it's something to keep in mind to keep you defensively sound in late stage submission escapes. So I hope that video was helpful. Make sure you guys go in, like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment in the comment section below, and check out my content in the video description. Thanks, guys.